First thing is apologies, and there are none. Zoom attendees, we have Lindsay McKenzie. And first up, we have a public forum with Mr. Vic West talking about audio crossing signals. Welcome, Vic.
We can shift the others down one.
Thank you, Councillor Scott.
There's a microphone there, is it?
Yeah, right.
Where about? Yes. Yes, good afternoon, councillors. I'm here representing Blind Citizens Association, and we're deeply concerned about the lack of maintenance around the audible crossing signals and the length of time they've actually taken to be repaired. Now I'll just run through. On the early March, I rang the 032, 111, 777 and request for service on the crossing signals on the corner of Leet and Calvin Street and Spey and corner of Spey Street. This is on the northwest corner, and also Don Street, also on the northwest corner. Those three, I reported those in early March. So anyway, I became aware of another one which was close to the Blind Foundation near the corner of Gala Street and on the northwest corner again. So, and this was, another member told me this was not working, but she was not unable to get across there to get the bus. And so I believe I told her to contact the council and request for service, but I added this on the middle of March. I rang through and told them that the Gala Street one was not, so there was those four. And about a week later I checked up and only that one on the Spey Street had been repaired. So that's about the 22nd of March, something around about that time, I'm pretty sure it was. But I note that that one there had been damaged. But anyway, going back, I then went back about a week later and found that the Leet Street one was been repaired. That had already been done. That still left the Gala Street and the Don Street one. Now, I went along there 2 or 3 times. The first time I went along to the corner of Don Street and stood on the corner by the building there, and I could barely hear it. I could hear the one on the Don Street, Calvin Street crossing working okay, but I had to walk forward and find the mat and then locate where the signal box on the Don Street was, and then I could hear, just faintly hear the signal coming from that. So then I went up and pushed the button and it actually went. So that was, I said, well, as far as I know, that one still hasn't been fixed, but I've been telling people that they should give that a wide berth because of the amount of work that's been carried off in Don Street, and probably not really, you need to attend to that one, I guess, for a while anyway. But getting back to the Gala Street one, I was a bit concerned about that because there are some members who use that. And so it was on the 7th of April was my last call, and I said that hadn't been repaired. So it was some point after the April the 7th that one was fixed. So I can report that one has been repaired. Okay. Now, going back to I would also, Mr. Chairman, I want to voice our other concern about the dual pedestrian crossing signal. The ones on the corner of St Andrew Street and Queen's Drive, St Andrew Street and Gala Street. Now, I just, as you know, when you approach it and push the button and the voice message comes up, press the button. If you need the longer crossing, push it until the red light appears and it beeps. I done that, but of course I can't see the red light and I can't hear no signal. This is on the corner, north corner of St Andrew Street. The message is a little bit scratchy, but not too bad. But when I went to the south side, I found that the sounds there for that one was very noisy. I couldn't understand it. Then I turned over to the Queen's Drive side one. That was a bit scratchy too, but it was audible enough. But still, again, push the button in for the longer service, and still no beep. Went across to the other side of Queen's Drive. There is no voice message there. And went down to the Gala Street crossing. No voice message there either. So I'm not too sure what's happened there, whether that's been removed or it's just not working, I don't know. Now, in respect of this dual pedestrian crossing signal, our association felt it was a great thing, because the late Carol Swale and myself, we showcased this to the country through a link with the on the national TV. And we thought it was a wonderful thing. And it's a crossing for not only people with disabilities, but people, for everyone who has problems with, say, young children, women with prams, or young children crossing, and they want the longer crossing. It's great. So we supported that and we took it to conference, a national conference, and they adopted it as part of their policy. So I just think I would like to see that we restore it back to its original state, and remind people that, you know, it's up and going, and keep reminding them to that this is the crossing that we really believe in. I really haven't got much more to say on the matter, but yeah, so that's about it, Mr. Chairman. I just hope that we can get some action in restoring that thing, because I think it's important, and because the people come down here and they probably, and I understand they've actually got it going up in Timaru, but I don't know how well it's working up there, I guess, but it's something that we should be proud of here.
Thank you, Vic, for that. What I'm going to do now is, Russell, would you like to speak to this? Because obviously we've got some questions coming, but I think it's probably best if you were able to address some of the initial concerns, and then I'll open it up to questions. Just about the actual functions of these particular. So it's more about the functionality of these.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. I will definitely follow up with our contractor. Our contractors inspect the audible signals on a reasonably regular basis, and I know the last one was done in March, but I will follow up today, and we'll obviously be doing those and liaise back to Vic. In terms of the crossing at St Andrew Street, that was actually undertaken as a trial. It's not been adopted nationally, and I understand and one of the issues that we will have over a longer time is that it's got a whole lot of extra components, and whilst I understand Vic's desire for it to be there, we've tried to keep it going, and we just need to make sure those components, which are a little bit more, I guess, vulnerable to vandalism and moisture egress, just to make sure they are able to operate. And I haven't been there in the last little while to check, but I'll get the team to do so.
No, thanks for that, Russell. So that's just answered those initial questions. What I'm going to do now is open up questions just for Vic only. Russell was just purely to give us a bit of a brief on how that all works as far as maintenance goes. So, any questions for Vic? Councillors? No? All good? Okay, Vic, thank you very much, and we will have some sort of report come back to council with your concerns.
Okay. Look, thanks very much for that opportunity. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Right, that moves on to a major late item that we have put to us. This is in relationship to change in delegations in relation to property sale of Lower East Street. It's going to be in public excluded. The reason it's a major late item is the late receipt of the material needed for this matter. So, and the reason why it is going into public excluded is so that the matter can be progressed in a timely manner to get put forward to council.
I'll move.
Second.
Thank you. I'll put that motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That is carried. Right, we'll move on to minutes of the Infrastructure Services Committee meeting held on the 1st of June. What I'm going to ask for is confirmation of the minutes, and also reminding that we have a recommendation that will go through to an extraordinary council meeting on the 10th of August. So can I have someone move that?
Move that.
Thank you, Councillor Soper. Seconded, Councillor Munson. I'll put that motion. All those for?
Aye.
Against? It's carried. Next, we have the minutes of the extraordinary meeting of the Infrastructure Services Committee held 27 July 2021. Can I have someone confirm those minutes, please? Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Graham. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That is carried. Now we have a verbal update from Erin on Three Water reform.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this verbal update is just to initiate some discussion and ensure that we are all on the same page as a council around where we are currently at on the Three Waters reform agenda that is currently underway. As we're all aware, the New Zealand government initiated a range of Three Waters reforms which are currently still underway now in 2021. Just as history over the past 2 decades, there's been a large number of government and private sector reports that have talked to a wide range of issues in the Three Waters space throughout New Zealand. The current reforms that are in front of us at the moment were triggered by the Havelock North incident in 2016, where contaminated groundwater entered the water network and resulted in 5,000 people becoming unwell and 4 consequential deaths. A subsequent central government inquiry observed that New Zealand had fallen quite a ways behind best practice in the delivery of drinking water, and made a wide range of recommendations in how we should be moving forward in that space. In terms of moving forward with that agenda, the central government has initiated 3 main reform actions. One of those being the establishment of Te Mata Arawai, the new drinking water regulator. One being a new water services bill, which sets out the powers of Te Mata Arawai and the standards with which drinking water providers must meet. And thirdly, a range of service delivery reforms. And those service delivery reforms are centred on the creation of 4 large public-owned water entities to take responsibility for the management of drinking water, wastewater and stormwater across the country. Now, as part of the recent local government conference, the Prime Minister announced a $2.5 billion package for councils as part of the water reform process to ensure that no council was disadvantaged should they elect to opt into transferring their Three Waters assets to these new entities. ICC will in the coming months need to make a decision on whether to opt into these reforms and pass responsibility for our Three Waters assets and services across to the new entity, or whether or not to opt out of those reforms. In determining the structure, number and scope of these new entities, government's been working with the Water Industry Commission for Scotland to learn from their experiences in water reform. They also entered into a memorandum of understanding with local authorities last year, where we've also provided extensive information through a request for information process, which has informed modelling undertaken by central government to inform the creation of the new entities. In July, central government released a report and its own modelling around the best options to move forward in terms of number of entities, scope of entities, and council officers are currently working through that modelling information to see how it compares to our understanding of the data and also to the work that was commissioned by Morrison Lowe on behalf of Otago Southland, which has also been happening at the same time as the modelling work undertaken by central government. There are some quite key differences between the modelling undertaken by central government and the modelling work that's been being undertaken by Otago Southland. And we are working, well, Michael Day, as our head of our finance team, is working through how we compare that modelling and what assumptions have been underpinning the results put out by the Department of Internal Affairs as the representative for central government on that. Now, over the next 8 weeks, councils have been advised that this is a period of engagement for us to consider what questions we need to ask, have dialogue with central government to make sure that we are able to close out all of the gaps in information that we may have ahead of the next period of engagement and decision making that will happen ahead of us making that key decision on whether to opt in or out of water reform. So the purpose of this verbal report was to initiate discussion amongst elected members around what information you might like, or what information or questions you might like us to go back to central government with to ensure that we have a full and complete understanding of the picture working through the water reform process.
Thank you, Erin. Right, so what we have now is an opportunity to raise some questions that councillors. I mean, this is not the only time, but it's a good start. Nobby.
Got a range, and I'd probably take all day if I went through all of them, but I'll just go through the main ones. Just to be mindful that the money that was offered by the Prime Minister of the $2.5 billion was actually only $1 billion of central government funding. The other $1.5 billion, which is 60% of it, is actually funded by the new water authority. So we've got to be careful that we don't get lost in this equation. We're actually funding our own investment. So the money, 60% of the $23 million that's earmarked for this council is actually coming from our own householders, our own ratepayers. It's not coming from central government. I find it really interesting that the government's now, and with LGNZ support, is now backing us off from declaring whether we want to opt in and opt out. It wasn't too long ago that they said to us we had 100 days to decide on this. We're now down to, I think, about 6 weeks, where we need to give some sort of indication of the questions that we want answered. And I find that a little bit frustrating because we've had a lot of information from the DIA. In fact, we've been overwhelmed by the amount of information we've been given around this issue. And I think government's now strategically moving us to not have a whole lot of councils like the declarations that have already been made by Waimakariri and by Whangarei, who've said that they're opting out. And so they're limiting their damage now and just saying, look, just tell us the questions you need answered and we'll get these questions back to you. Well, that works on a premises that whatever they give us back will convince us to stay in. It was interesting when we had the independent advice from Morrison Lowe, which was an Otago Southland look at the situation. And when we had that here with Invercargill, they clearly said to us, and I'll quote what the gentleman said, he said, Invercargill City Council could well make a good case for opting out. And I thought that was really interesting, because one of the issues about us all being in the same waka, as it were, is that there will be some degree of cross-subsidy, which means that those councils who have more affordable networks, who have done well in investment or have borrowing capacity, will subsidise those that haven't got that. So the argument that the government has come to us on has said, look, those councils that are getting close to their ceiling and can't borrow anymore, if we take the debt away from you, you'll have more capacity to borrow. Well, that's a fallacy, an absolute fallacy, because all that's saying is we'll take the debt away, your householders will still pay for it through the new entity, and then as council we can go off and spend more money. Well, people would argue rates are already high enough up. So I guess I think it would be important for us to, somewhere along the line in the next 5 or 6 weeks, to have had a workshop or a couple of workshops where we get our position worked up about whether we want to stay in or stay out. And I'd be interested to know at the early workshop whether Michael can give us some advice around the dashboard report that we got recently, because that's quite critical as well. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thanks, Nobby. Anyone else? Look, I've got a couple of questions. First one's around actually the decision-making process that we will go through. Currently, the way it's, and this is a question to ask the DIA, currently we have a significant engagement policy. In fact, every council in New Zealand does. And within that, we list our strategic assets. And listed under, it's like the crown jewels we've got tucked away. In that are our 3 waters horizontal infrastructure. Now, for us to make any decision concerning a change of service of those, we have to go through what's called a special consultation procedure. And that means we cannot do anything without going out to the public and doing a lengthy consultation about anything we want to do with them. So at the moment, the way the Local Government Act sits, and that statutory law, we can't make a decision. We can't. So one question is, are they going to change the act that enables us, well, basically change the rule book, Aaron? So that's one question. The next question is around privatisation. Now, if everybody hands over, or the government decide that maybe legislation's a better way of acquiring these assets, privatisation looms as a real threat. When I was in the local government conference a couple of weeks ago, the Prime Minister mentioned that privatisation of these assets wouldn't happen under her watch. Now, when someone says it won't happen under your watch, you think, well, maybe there's a chance under a government in a few years later, 20 years' time, that privatisation is actually an option, because any new government can rewrite the books. So that's another question, is about privatisation, because at the moment I see the way we do our services is cost. Council doesn't add on a profit. We deliver the service at what it costs, and that's what the ratepayers pay. If it becomes a private service delivered, then are they going to do it at cost? I don't think so. So again, that's one of my major concerns as well. So anyone else got any sort of concerns about the way this may roll out? I'm going to go Councillor Lush, then Councillor Cracker.
Yeah, just obviously for me, I've missed a lot of some of the discussions about this because I've been early to council. But my concerns are twofold. If we keep providing water within Invercargill, whether in the future we will plan to charge for that, and what we can expect those charges to be over time, because I know that that's been one of the considerations, that the water will become overly expensive, and also to the advantages from Three Waters for the security of our water supply, as far as whether we would be getting better water because of that, as far as all those things that because I don't really know much about our water supply here, whether it's got nitrates or what's in that, but whether we would be guaranteed a better supply of water, whether it have any control about that. But that would be my things that I'd like information on.
Okay. Alex and then Nobby.
Thank you, Councillor Pottinger. I'm much of the same train of thought as yourself and Nobby, that this entire process I'm sort of like quite uncomfortable with, in the sense that, I mean, I don't disagree with the government. The principles of the government are clear. You should be able to access or have access to clean drinking water no matter where you go throughout the country. Like, I don't dispute that, but it's the way in which this is being almost imposed on us that I'm uncomfortable with. All the reporting that we've had, like the Morrison Lowe report that Councillor Clark referenced earlier, and the reporting that's come through nationally says that the economy of scale of this is only achieved, and the efficiency, with everybody opting in, and with other councils talking about opting out. Like, I don't see how that is going to achieve what they've set out to do. And in that case, does that mean we'll be forced in? Will this end up being mandated? Is it something that, rather than us actually talking to our community about whether or not it's best for us, will we be forced into it? I mean, they're already saying that they're going to, well, we already know they're going to have to change the Local Government Act for us to even make this decision, because legally we can't. We legally are bound to make the best financially prudent decision for our constituents, like our local rohi, and they're asking us to make a decision of national significance, and the two just don't align. So, I mean, I agree, like I've said, that the principles are clear. Everybody should have access to fantastic drinking water no matter where you go throughout the country, but it's the process in which they're undertaking it and forcing it on us that I'm really uncomfortable with.
So just would you ask a question then? Would this go ahead with some in and some out?
Yeah, my question is, do you think it will be mandated, and will it go ahead with some in, some out?
Okay, I'm going to go Nobby then to.
So just as a reflection to some of my colleagues' questions, and I'll just quickly run through them. The privatisation issue is interesting. The government has said, or DIA has said on behalf of the government, the minister has also said it, that she believes that the water entities will have 50% stakeholding by mana whenua. So in our case, that's Ngāi Tahu, and that will safeguard any privatisation, because the legislation will require a 75% vote. What she didn't say was that He Puapua has a potential for future councils to be split down the middle between members at large and members from mana whenua. So if Ngāi Tahu in the South Island has 50% of the stakeholding in the entity, which is the stakeholder groups that sit above it, and half the councillors were mana whenua as well, that would be 75%. So does that create a greater degree of safety? Alternatively, does it open the door that the entity could be privatised in favour of iwi? And when I've asked that question, I get an absolute brick wall that tells me nothing. It was interesting that Marcus raised the issue about water quality and water supply. So they're two different things. Water quality will be regulated under the Water Services Bill, not there yet. And what it says is that there will be what they refer to as a series of barriers that stop the infiltration of drinking water being contaminated. Those barriers are not necessarily physical barriers, they could be chemical barriers as well. That'll be no different whether we're in or out of this thing. We will have to comply with that regulation. On the issue of the supply, we're one of the few councils that has a sole supply out of the river. And so we've got a risk there, but our council, to its credit, has identified this several years ago, and we're currently doing testing of bores that will go into aquifer to find out whether we have a suitable alternative supply, because you do need a backup. So that work's well underway anyway. It was interesting that the minister, when asking for our questions back, which is what Erin's trying to collate now, has said, and said in writing, that she has yet to decide on the pathway forward. And I think that's government speak for she has yet to decide whether they will mandate or regulate us in. and the information we're getting from DIA and from local government New Zealand is quite clear. Unless we're all in, the minister will have one or two options. That would be to back away from this process and just regulate and leave the councils to do their own thing, or she'll mandate us all in. And so I think we face that anyway. The other thing is the issue of economy of scale, that if you're in with a whole lot of other councils, you can you can get economy of scale, and that's quite questionable in the South Island. We don't have a big network to be into, even though geographically we do have, but we don't have the number of connections, where Auckland's got 1.7 million in their region. And it was interesting that the DIA has sponsored quite a few reports. So they've got the Wicks report out of Scotland, which talks about Scotland and it talks about Tasmania, but it does not talk about Victoria, which has also gone down the same path. They've got Deloitte's, which is a report that's positive about where we're going, but they haven't promoted the other report, which is the Farrier Weir report, which is quite a short report and well worth reading, because the summary quite clearly says the economy of scale cannot be justified under this framework. And so that's only one of 4 underlying planks to make this a decision that we opt in and opt out. Economy of scale, can they recruit and retain enough staff, quality staff? So that's the water engineers, I guess. Can the industry deliver? And clearly they can't at this stage. And there is the issue of cross-subsidy. And if you can take away a couple of those planks, then the system starts to fall over a little bit, and that's something we'll have to come to.
Can I ask what the questions were in there, since that's what we're trying to collate at the moment?
Nobody, do you want to add that as a question? I think you've raised a few issues. Aaron, you've got those, yeah. Councillor Abbott.
Yeah, well, I'm a wee bit off wing on this one, but I'm concerned about the advertising campaign on television. Quite concerned about that. It's not the perception to the public is it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I sort of indicate the big green frog that sits on the lily pad and smacks his lips after eating the dragonfly. I'd like to see that question asked, because it determines to the public that the matter is going ahead no matter what.
It's interesting you raised that question. In Dunedin, about 4 weeks ago, it was raised in front of the minister.
What, the frog?
About the advertising.
Okay.
And she apologised for the advertising.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, how it was sort of in a negative way towards councils, but we still see the ads are running.
Absolutely.
So
continuously.
They changed it, didn't they?
yeah, they might have changed a couple of things. Yeah,
Not much.
yeah.
They changed that.
Frog still eats the dragonfly.
I think the ones we're seeing are the amended.
The amended ads. So yeah, so it has been amended. Rebecca.
My question is around the fact that Invercargill it's already been mentioned that we're in quite a good position in terms of the infrastructure and all that stuff to do with Three Waters. So my question would be, if we opt into this entity, will we gain any benefits or discounts or something because we're already in a relatively good position, and that money doesn't need to be spent here in the same way it might need to be spent in other areas?
Got that, Aaron?
And I don't need Councillor Clark to answer that. I would like an answer from the government, please.
Well,
Sorry, Councillor Clark.
those questions have been asked before, and we've had the DIA response to those.
Right. So the other question I like to raise, and I think Councillor Crackett might have got it at the local government conference and the young persons meeting with the minister about water metering.
Young elected members.
Yeah, would that be a compulsory thing to make the system work? Would we end up with water meters, even though we've found it not necessary under the current service that we do for this whole system to work? Thank you. Right. Councillor Clark.
2 last questions for Leslie's benefit. I'd like to know from DIA why they haven't factored in the cost of purchasing and implementing the water meters on the South Island Takiwā. So, because we're going to need them. And the second issue is there is acknowledgement from the DIA that all water treatment discharges in future need to be land to land. It can't go out to water, which is river or ocean. and I want to know why they haven't factored that in as well, because 89% of the treatment plants in the country go to water, and that's a cost that should be factored in so we know what we're dealing with.
Okay, that's excellent. Okay, further questions? Well, thank you very much, Aaron, for that. And when's the next step for us?
So we're in a bit of a holding pattern following the feedback of our questions and essentially working with central government on our information gaps. There will then be, a announcement around what will happen in terms of next steps and engagement from there. We have always been working towards the timeline of September this year. The most recent correspondence, though, I think probably suggests that there may be a little bit more time taken as part of this, but we will wait to find out at the end of the 8 weeks.
The other question was with figures. Now, the dashboard figures and everything, are we going to get a revision of our ones, considering the debt positions and stuff? Is that going to happen?
Are you asking whether we will get a revision of whether DIA will revise their figures?
Correct, yeah.
I don't expect that they will. I think the view is that, look, there may be some assumptions from their view. I think they think that there may be some assumptions that aren't quite right, but the bones of it is there. As far as they're concerned, that makes a sufficient case to be moving on with.
Okay. Right, thank you. We'll move on to item 7, which is the drinking water compliance and drinking water standards of New Zealand. Erin.
I'm actually going to ask Adrian Cocker, Mr. Chair, to step forward and just take any questions on this report. I think generally we can take it as read. Would be just if any elected members have got any specific questions.
Thanks, Adrian. Right, Councillor Abbott.
Yeah, just one little point that I think would be better for clarification. In the third paragraph that starts it is important to note that the leniency has been applied by public health. They omitted no blah, 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 blah. And it comes to sufficient evidence that although monitoring was absent, I'd like to put that although data monitoring was absent, because you had the physical monitoring, but you didn't have the data.
Adrian, do you want to?
Yeah, that would be a worthwhile edit, I believe.
I'd like to see that popped in.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Any other questions for Adrian?
Not really a question, but just that the leniency applied by Public Health South, like that will become Te Mara Arawai in the next tranche as the Water Services Bill comes to light and Te Mara Arawai comes to its standing, that they will be the new regulator that we will be reporting to rather than Public Health South, right?
Yeah, I believe that would be the case. We're expecting that Te Mara Arawai will actually have legislative powers at the earliest November, depending on whether the Water Services Bill goes through in its final reading, which I think is some way down the track. At the end of the day, we don't even know if there will be an annual compliance component until Te Mara Arawai sort of give us a bit more information. There will be still compliance periods, and those compliance periods are changing, but the annual compliance period was more for the Director General of Health, as he was required under the Public Health Act revised to have all water authorities report yearly and have a summary as to how people were going.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Just a very basic question, Mr. Chair. The reason for blowing the fuse was just one of those things. There wasn't an overload somewhere that needs to be monitored.
It was an overload by an electrician doing something that he didn't know he was doing. So it was operator error, I think. They were ironically putting in extra monitoring to make the system a bit more robust, and when that extra monitoring went in, they managed to short a circuit, which blew a fuse in the UPS, which is the uninterruptible power supply, which runs the monitoring.
It's rather reassuring that there's a definite reason for the problem.
Yeah,
Thanks very much.
Yeah,
Cheers.
we have been able to track down who it was.
Thanks.
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay.
With that
Hold it.
included.
Question from His Worship and then Nobby.
I'm just wondering, Mr. Chair, if we've got a plan B, or if we end up facing the same situation that we did in 1989 and got, despite all the evidence, we weren't able to impose our will, and would we be in the same position? And if we are, have we got a plan B?
So what happened in 1989?
Local government was forced to amalgamate.
Okay, and that's got to do with Branksome.
Well, same sort of scenario, sorry, Your Worship, but there were some who didn't want to amalgamate, and in the end they were told to.
And that blew a fuse.
Oh. Worked all right. Worked all right for us because we front-footed it.
Right, okay. Right, thank you for that answer. Councillor Abbott, oh, sorry,
No, I'm just
Councillor Clark.
Yeah, Adrian, just as a follow-on from Alex's questions, it would seem to me that the water entity doesn't take over till 2024. So in the interim, we'll continue over the next 2 or 3 years to report to the Ministry of Health.
No, my understanding is that when Te Mata Arawai get the legislative powers, that it will be switched over. And in fact, the national database that holds all the water information, which is Drinking Water Online, goes offline as soon as Te Mata Arawai take over. So we will be reporting to different people, I expect, certainly by this time next year. When I asked the question from Public Health South about reporting into the future, they said, well, until everything stays the same, whether the legislative power or the regulator, until such a stage as Te Mata Arawai come on board, which, as I say, will be when they get legislative powers.
And so that's only an annual report, isn't it?
That's an annual report. So it's just a summary of the state of the nation, shall we say.
Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Abbott, you've moved that we receive the report compliance with drinking water standards of New Zealand. Can I have a seconder, please?
Oh, it's happily seconded. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That is carried. Moves us on to item 8, which is a report back actually from EIL, our Electricity Invercargill Limited, about their network and its future capacity with regards to electric vehicles. Welcome, Andrew Cameron,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
electrical engineer extraordinaire.
Tesla driver.
The response from EIL was provided at a high level at this stage. Obviously, if there is detailed questions required, they're happy to have someone turn up and answer those, but it was thought that at least initially there would be the high-level response regarding their preparedness in terms of the investigations they're undertaking and what they're looking at, foreseeing this to occur. And at this stage, at a high level, they're satisfied that they're able to meet the demand that they see coming. And also, as they pointed out in their response, the broader decarbonisation issue, where you've got a transition from coal burners to electricity and those sort of other activities going on in the same place. They're satisfied that the network can handle those changes. But if you want some more detailed responses, happy to either put the specific questions or have someone attend, but we thought it might be more timely or better use of time to have the high-level response first.
No, that's fine. Thanks for that. So when you talk about the coal boilers thing, it's like identifying, say, a school or something that may be switching or a business.
Yes, and the forecast, and there's some bigger industrial bodies obviously going as well. There's changes with the milk, the way that's going and all the rest of it. So there are big transactions going on in that space.
Okay, questions for Andrew? Councillor Abbott?
I think it would have been interesting, in my perspective anyway, to know that the 8,000 wattage per annum to 12,000, 13,000, be interesting to know what that cost might be in power costs.
For the consumer?
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think that's actually a typo there, because it says 8,000 watts to 12,000 kilowatts. Now that's not a 50% increase. I think there should be a kilowatt on that 8,000 bit. Further questions?
We can come back with that, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's just.
Happy to move the recommendations, Mr Chair.
Seconded.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Councillor Ludlow. With that, I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
All those against? That's carried. That moves us on to the activity report. And who would like to speak to this?
So I'm happy to speak to the infrastructure portion, but I might call Steve Gibbling up to find out if he's got any introductions he'd like to make to the leisure and recreation portion of the report, which is up first.
Steve, would you like to use the hand mic, or would you be welcome to the stand?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Only probably two comments. One is around the pool numbers. We're still seeing the tail of the COVID impact on the numbers, but as noted in the report, the numbers are catching up to pre-COVID levels, which is good, and I think that reflects a consistency of service and operating hours and conditions. In the parks and recreation section of the report, we have noted that we've undertaken a performance review and of 182 parks, and we've noted in there that there are 6 parks of poor condition, and that's going to focus our resource over the coming months as we look to understand exactly what the remedial actions are in there. There's around 27 factors that we've assessed across those 182 parks for each park, and they include factors like play equipment, the network infrastructure, which is our drainage, stormwater, park infrastructure, the horticultural and amenity value, and also the turf and open space. And so we've now, probably for the first time, got a really good sense of the standard of our parks, and that's going to drive our work program going forward. So happy to answer any questions on the rest.
Okay, questions? Councillor Crackett.
Thank you, Councillor Pottinger. I've got a question, I think, for Steve. In your hydroslide report here, we've got the old slide average use for the total of 5,800 usage. Obviously, with the old slide, there wasn't the additional admission charge.
Correct.
So, and I know that when we decided to go ahead with this hydroslide, it was fantastic because it was a good news story for our community, but it was also going to be self-funding in the end. So I was just wondering what that 7,900, like if you could quantify that financially, possibly not today, but like so we could have an idea of where we are tracking in terms of being self-sufficient or a self-sufficient project.
Sure. I'll probably have to come back to you with that.
I don't expect you to just have them out of nowhere.
Yeah, we do have a good sense of the overall performance, both in terms of numbers and financials. So I'll come back at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Arnold.
Mine was the same sort of question. I was
Okay.
just wondering about a performance against budget. Basically the same question, yeah. Thank you.
Nobby.
Steve, just an issue that we talked about earlier, you and I talked about, which was the issue of car parking around some venues that are not club related, but they're more specific than that. So in particular around Turnbull Thompson, where there is a significant lack of car parking for junior soccer, and around the stadium as well, when we have high profile or high volume events there, that there seems to be a lack of car parking there. So whether there's something that in the future you will look to try and address some issues there?
Yeah, we are undertaking an assessment on the standard of our car parking infrastructure and reserves. Some of this will be, as in the case with Surrey Park, will be included in the master planning, but we are also looking at a range of the other car parks that we've got that we are maintaining at the moment, either directly or in partnership with the clubs. Some of these are tied up with leases, and so the team are currently just going through and identifying the responsibility.
Thank you.
Thanks, Darren.
Just further to that, Steve, when you're talking to Football Southland, you might like to raise the issue of the way they're car parking up and around the turf, because they're driving right up to the turf so they can stay in their SUVs and watch, which is causing quite a bit of churn as they come off the roadway. There's quite a pool of mud there now, when there are actually car parking spaces available. So, that's frustration, because obviously it's up to council to tidy up that mess.
Thank you.
Steve, I've just got one question regarding the release of the new Kaka pier. I was there that evening.
Yeah.
It was a great introduction for them, especially the welcoming from Michael Skerritt. Now, two questions. Did that one ever get out of its cage?
Yes.
That's good. And obviously, have we had any feedback about how they're sort of adapting? Obviously, this is a new pier brought into an existing pier for breeding purposes.
The initial feedback was that they were acclimatizing, and but I can get some more detail as to how they currently are. I got feedback after the first couple of weeks, and we were noticing a few behaviours, and so we've just now got to understand a bit more. So I can come back at the next meeting and give you a bit more of an update.
No, thanks for that. They're magnificent birds. Marcus.
Yeah, through your chair, just I apologise if this is a bit of a speculator, but I see that footpaths are part of your watch. Just the number of abandoned bus shelters, particularly in Levin Street, out the back of farmers and stuff like that, that appear to no longer be on routes. They look terrible. Is there a plan to get rid of those, or are they just going to...
I'll get Aaron. I'll get Aaron to speak to that.
Okay.
Yeah, no, Aaron will answer that.
No, that's quite okay. That's just moving back to the infrastructure portion. So we do, I'd need to have a look at exactly which ones, but I definitely have recently raised the issue around some not great looking bus shelters around the place. Quite a few of them are not ours, and so we're just working through the process of either getting those tidied up or getting those removed.
Thank you. Whose are they?
A range of stakeholders, not any one particular.
Okay, further questions? The recommendation is that the committee receives the activity report. I'll move that. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Clark, I'll put that. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That's carried. That is the end of the public session of this committee. So can I have someone move that we please go into public excluded, and the reasons being to confirm the minutes of the two public excluded meetings and for the reason of the property sale. Seconded. Thank you, Councillor Soper. Put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That's carried. And we are off.
Maintenance?